And we are back to What Did AI Say at VickyL-4AI on YouTube. Thank you so very much for coming back to the podcast. As always, gratitude is the attitude. Let's go ahead and jump right into today's question. Episode number 59, and we're going to start with Chatgpt. The question is, how did the elites in the 1600s create a white race to avoid another Bacon's Rebellion? That's a good one. The idea that elites created the white race after Bacon's Rebellion is a well known interpretation of American history, especially among historians who study race, labor, and colonial law. It doesn't mean whiteness was invented from nothing, but that colonial leaders reorganized laws, privileges, and social categories to turn poor Europeans into a separate, superior group and to stop cross class solidarity between Africans, indigenous people, and European laborers. Let me repeat that. The idea that elites created the white race after Bacon's Rebellion is a well known interpretation in American history, especially among historians who study race, labor, and colonial law. It doesn't mean whiteness was invented from nothing, but that colonial leaders reorganized laws, privileges, and social categories to turn poor Europeans into a separate, superior group and to stop cross class solidarity between Africans, indigenous people, and European laborers. Here's how it unfolded. This is going to be good. 1. Context. Before the 1670s, Virginia society wasn't strictly racial. In early 1600s Virginia, European, Africans, and some indigenous people worked together as indentured servants. People of different backgrounds married, escaped, rebelled, and lived in close quarters. African slavery existed, but it wasn't yet a rigid, lifelong system. Some Africans gained freedom and owned land. Race was not yet the main organizing principle, class was. Bacon's rebellion in 1676 terrified the colonial ruling class. Nathaniel Bacon led poor Europeans, enslaved Africans, free Africans, and landless men of all backgrounds in a rebellion against the wealthy planter elite, Governor Berkeley, and big landowners. The rebellion wasn't racial, it was poor versus rich. When the multiracial coalition burned Jamestown, elites realized the biggest threat wasn't Native Americans or Africans. It was poor people uniting across color lines. Let me repeat that. When the multiracial coalition burned Jamestown, elites realized the biggest threat wasn't Native Americans or Africans. It was poor people uniting across color lines. Excuse me. After the rebellion was crushed, the elite made a strategic choice. Stop cross-class alliances by elevating poor Europeans and isolating Africans. This became the foundation of whiteness. 3. After 1676, Virginia elites rewrote the laws to create a new racial caste system. Between 1680 to 1705, the Virginia Assembly passed a series of laws that gave special privileges to Europeans, which were now called white. Poor Europeans received lighter punishments than Africans for the same offenses. They could own weapons. They received reduced terms of indenture. They were given land after service. They were exempt from certain punishments or taxes that applied to Africans. This turned poor Europeans into a buffer class to identify with the elite. Whoa. This turned poor Europeans into a buffer class to identify with the elite. B. Remove rights and mobility from Africans. Slavery became lifelong and hereditary. The 1662 law, the coalition of the child follows the mother. Africans could not bear arms. Africans could not testify against Europeans. Conversion to Christianity was no longer a path to freedom. Conversion to Christianity was no longer a path to freedom. Interesting. Interracial marriage was criminalized. White women who had children with black men were punished severely. C. White became a legal category. The 1691 and 1705 laws explicitly use the term white to define identity, privileges, and rights. Before this, white was not a major legal classification in Virginia law. 4. Why this is considered the creation of the white race. Historians like Theodore Allen, Barbara Fields, Nell Painter, and Edmund Morgan argue white was constructed as a political identity, not just a description of European ancestry. It was designed to make poor Europeans identify with the elite rather than with black laborers who shared their same economic position. Let me repeat that. White was constructed as a political identity, not just a description of European ancestry. It was designed to make poor Europeans identify with the elite rather than with black laborers who shared their same economic position. Isn't that something? Racial privilege was a tool of social control, not a natural division. In Morgan's words, racism was made to preserve slavery, not the other way around. 5. The purpose, divide and control. The elite strategy was simple. Before Bacon's Rebellion, poor Europeans plus Africans equal possible allies, threat to the elites. After Bacon's Rebellion, poor Europeans plus elite equal white people. Africans equal permanent enslaved caste, no more united rebellion. Diabolical. By giving poor Europeans a new identity, called white, with small but meaningful privileges, elites prevented future cross-racial uprisings. 6. Long-term impact. This post-1676 restructuring hardened racial boundaries, institutionalized slavery, created the concept of white privilege, linked freedom with whiteness, set the foundation for American racial hierarchy for centuries. The white race as a political category became a central pillar of colonial and later U.S. social order. Now, this is Chatgpt telling you, if you want, it can also explain which exact laws created whiteness, how this compares to racial formation in other colonies, why many historians call this the invention of the white race, and how elites use similar tactics in other countries to prevent unified uprisings. And let me tell you, we're not taught our history because if we were, we wouldn't be where we are today. Okay, let's continue with Deepseek. And just in case you forgot the question, let me re-ask it. How did the elites in the 1600s create a white race to avoid another Bacon's Rebellion? Excellent and important question. You're referring to a critical turning point in American history, analyzed profoundly by historians like Theodore W. Allen in The Invention of the White Race and Edmund S. Morgan in American Slavery, American Freedom. Both those names were mentioned in ChatGPT's answer as well. Let's continue. The elite's response to Bacon's Rebellion in 1676 is considered a pivotal moment in creating a white race as a social and legal control mechanism. Here's how and why it happened. The threat of Bacon's Rebellion, a class-based alliance. Bacon's Rebellion was not a race war. It was a class rebellion of impoverished European indentured servants and enslaved Africans against the colonial elite, the plantocracy of Virginia. The alliance formerly divided servants and slaves fought together against a common enemy, the wealthy landowners who exploited them. The fear. The colonial ruling class realized their greatest existential threat was a united front of laboring people across racial lines. Let me repeat that. The fear. The colonial ruling class realized their greatest existential threat was a united front of laboring people across racial lines. They could not survive another rebellion where the majority, which were the laborers, united against the tiny minority, the elite. 2. The deliberate strategy, divide and rule. To prevent future cross-racial solidarity, the elite embarked on a conscious strategy to elevate poor Europeans socially and legally, degrade Africans permanently and hereditably, create a new psychological wage of whiteness, a sense of superiority and shared identity for all Europeans, regardless of class, against all Africans. This was a racial bribe or a public and psychological wage, a term later used by W.E.B. Du Bois. 3. The legal and social mechanisms. The elite institutionalized this divide through a series of laws in the decades following 1676, known as the Virginia Slave Codes and related statutes. A. For Africans, creating permanent hereditary slavery. Before 1660, status of Africans was often ambiguous. Some were servants with terms, some were slaves for life. After the 1680s, laws explicitly defined slavery as a lifetime inheritable condition based on the mother's status, partus sequitur ventrium. This created a permanently racially defined upper class. This created a permanent racially defined upper class. B. For poor Europeans, granting privileges and a shared identity. Disarming and policing. Laws were passed to disarm Africans and forbid them from assembling, while explicitly allowing poor whites to bear arms and serve in the militia. This made poor whites the enforcers of the racial order. Sex and family. Miscegenation laws, I think I pronounced that correctly. 1691 banned marriage and sex between Europeans and Africans with severe punishments. This policed the racial boundary and prevented the formation of mixed race families that could blur the lines. Legal rights. The right to own property, to sue in court, and to have contractual rights were systemically stripped from Africans and preserved for Europeans, no matter how poor. Psychological wage. Poor whites were told they were white and thus superior, entitled to a higher social status, even if they owned no land or slaves. They were no longer just English servants. They were part of the white race, a category that conferred social privilege over anyone of African descent. 4. The result. Replacing class conflict with racial hierarchy. Social control. The primary goal was achieved. Future unrest, like the Gloucester County conspiracy in 1663 or later rebellions, would be racially divided. Poor whites now identified more with the rich white planter who shared their race than with the black laborer who shared their class exploitation. Incredible. Creation of whiteness. A new social construct was born. White became a legal and social category that granted specific privileges. It papered over the vast class differences between a wealthy planter and a dirt poor indentured servant. Foundation for systemic racism. This legal architecture became the bedrock of American chattel slavery and the color line that persists to this day. It embedded the idea of racial hierarchy into law, economics, and culture from the colony's inception. In summary, this is a Deepseek summary. The colonial elite, terrified by the class solidarity of Bacon's rebellion, invented whiteness as a deliberate tool of social control. They did this by 1. Legally codifying African hereditary slavery. 2. Granting new social and legal privileges to all Europeans. 3. Fostering a racial ideology that taught the lowest European that they were superior to the highest African. This historical shift replaced a potentially dangerous class-based society with a more stable race-based society, securing the power of the landed elite for generations and laying the foundation for American racial capitalism. And there you have it. That was a mouthful. Okay, so how does any of this affect our daily lives? Well, let's start from the beginning. The so-called white race was created so that people of fair skin identified with elites and did not identify with others within their own class. And people ask, how can racist white people support the elite that have more money than them, that don't care anything about them? And this is how. This is why. This is history that we weren't taught. So just understand that none of this is by accident. None of this just happened. All of this was created, and it was created so that the 1%ers could stay in power generation after generation after generation, and so that the rest of us, the 99%ers, could have practically nothing. So knowing your history is so important. It is so important because without it, we just repeat the same cycles. We don't elevate. We don't break our chains. We don't create a better society for all, a more equal society for all. That is within our grasp. But first and foremost, we all have to learn our true history. So I don't know if racist white people, seeing that even in their demographic, they had the highest food stamp recipients than all other demographics, the percentage. And it doesn't matter how many, everybody wants to make up the excuses. It's a percent of the total population of white people. It's still higher than the percent of the total population of minority people. So just understand, you're defending an elite class that doesn't care about you. And they've taken away your government assistant and you're still defending them. So, one thing that I read somewhere many years ago, and I repeat it now to this day, is that the racist white people are the elite's most useful slaves. It's the truth. Okay, let's move right along to our saying. Not sure if it's a positive one, but let's see what we got. I don't know who said this, but it works perfectly with this episode. This isn't the left versus the right. This is the people versus the elite. You better know that. Okay, that's all I have for you today. If you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe to the podcast so we can continue to bring you more and more, ask more and more questions of AI to get to the truth of what's actually going on. Okay, peace.